So thanks to Photo Wings for making these events possible and open to everyone. So Seb, it's great to have you. So your bio says that you're an animal rights activist, lecturer, photojournalist, and author. And of course, we came to know of your work through We Animals Media and Joanne MacArthur. Joanne, we did an event with her back in October 2021 now. So we're following on that issue because I think it raises a lot of really interesting questions about the role of images in relationship to advocacy, questions of impact, social change, and so on. But you have a very interesting background, Seb, to this work that you're doing now, quite a journey from working in architecture in the corporate world. Fill us in on how you came to be where you are today.
Sure. So I actually, when I finished school, did want to study photography, actually. I'm born and raised in Lebanon. And I remember at the time, the reason I didn't do it is because I knew for a fact that I can't make a living out of photography in Lebanon. My next idea was sculpture, which is definitely not easier than photography to make money. And following that was history, specifically in Egypt, archaeology, which is also another no. And so the fourth one was architecture, which I really enjoy as well. So it's not like something I didn't like. So I studied architecture, moved to Paris, Europe in general, to continue and finish my studies. I got my master's in sustainable architecture. Worked in architecture for some time, and I had a corporate job basically. And eventually, I was vegan when I started doing that job, and I started getting active because I realized it was great that I was not personally contributing to what was happening to other animals, but it was not enough when it comes to stopping or trying as much as you can to help other people to see why it's better not to do that. And the more I did activism, the more I realized, okay, if I put more time into this, I can have a better impact. And that's when I decided to leave the corporate world and dedicate all my time for activism. I told you earlier, most people look at how I look, they sometimes assume, I was born in a hippie family, vegan from day one, or a vegetarian or whatever. I was definitely not a vegan or a vegetarian. I also used to go hunting. I loved eating meat, cheese, animal products in general. But I haven't had any meat or animal flesh since I was 16. So I haven't had that for 17 years now. And I haven't had any animal products for 9 years.
Wow.
And eventually, while doing animal rights activism, animal advocacy in an educational way, I started taking photos outside slaughterhouses of trucks arriving and the animals inside, sometimes entering farms as well, documenting inside. And I realized, photography is something that catches something in a specific moment. And that's it. Once the picture is taken, it's always going to be there, no matter what happens to that place, event, or individual. And I found that very powerful about photography. And that's how I started taking more photos. I mean, even before I started working in architecture, I shortly worked with the UNHCR, so the United Nations Committee for Refugees. And at the time, there were a lot of refugees arriving from Syria. And I knew for a fact that one thing that really blew up the amount of donations they were receiving was when a photo emerged of the Syrian boy, 4-year-old boy, whose body washed up the shore.
Right.
And obviously it's a horrible thing to see, it's a horrible thing to happen, but horrible images remind people of the urgency of certain events and why we should be active and help as much as we can. So the more I did that, the more I saw an impact, especially with social media. We'll get into it later. But yeah, and then eventually I started taken more photos with we animals as well, and that's how I ended up here.
Yeah. And did you, I mean, it's not important in the sense that, probably a huge number, if not a majority of photographers are actually self-taught and so on. Were you self-taught? Did you train in a
No,
formal sense
self-taught.
in photography?
I never trained. The only thing I've done in that way is just watch YouTube videos on understanding certain functions on the camera.
Right. Right.
And I feel like there's never an end to it. It's like as much as you watch, there's still gonna be things you never know how to use on a camera. But I know what I need for now.
Yeah.
So that's it. Well, I do have to say as a disclaimer, with my fellowship, I definitely got help and support from the We Animals media team, so that's there for sure.
Yeah. So in that sense, photography for you was always a kind of a communicative tool rather than an end in itself. Would that be a correct characterization?
Yes, definitely, because I always found war photography, conflict photography very interesting. I grew up in Lebanon, as I said. I was born during the last 2 years of the Civil War, which lasted 15 years. Obviously, I don't remember anything, but I have seen photos from the 15 years long Civil War. And I find it very fascinating because not only does it capture a moment where you see the horrible things that are happening, the destroyed buildings, sometimes the bodies and everything, but it also can show you how normalized all of that was.
Yeah.
So you can see like people dressing up as Santa Claus because it's Christmas Day, while behind them there's all this destruction, and that shows how normalized the violence was. And I think that's one of the most powerful things about photography.
Yeah. And you were attracted to still photography rather than moving images and video, and if so, why was that the case?
I think the reason why I find still better is because you can actually be in the moment. As in, if it's a video, and let's imagine a video of an animal getting slaughtered, you're getting all these inputs of different seconds and emotions and moments that the animal is going through, that you cannot really keep up with it. But for example, and we'll go through the photos, if you grab a still photo of what the animal looked like right before the slaughter, then the person can literally look in the eyes, look at the different factors, look at the context, understand what's going on. And I think that's, in my opinion at least, I think that gives more emotional connection to what's happening than just video.
Yeah. And just going back to your personal biography, you said that you've not had animal products for a long time and so on. What was the drive to give up animal products in your life? Was there a particular moment? Was there a particular issue?
Yes, it was actually very interesting. It was because of a cat that we had at home that I was a big fan of.
Right.
And a friend of mine called me out on my hypocrisy. She said, why do you always talk like you're an animal lover? You don't love animals, you just love your cat. I really didn't like hearing that. So we started having a massive argument. And she said, you literally hunt animals, you eat meat, you do all of these things. I understand you think you like animals, but you like your cat, and there's a difference. And I couldn't really argue against it. And then she just showed me, I think, 10 minutes long slaughter footage and just farm footage. And when I finished, I thought, okay, I either stop now or have to come up with a really good argument. And I haven't come up with a good argument since then.
Because you've written a book which is called When Animal Rights and Logic Meet, and so was that question of logic and the inability to think about logically how you could have both those positions, was that one of the driving things?
Of course, because I realized that the ways that we try to justify what we do to other animals are based on arguments that are fallacious. So they're based on logical fallacies. So if someone says, for example, well, we've been doing it for thousands of years, it's correct, but that's an appeal to tradition fallacy. That means that just because X has been done for a long time, it also means X is moral, which is not the case, of course. If you look back at, we've been killing each other for thousands of years, but so that's a logical fallacy. And so the book is about all the different logical fallacies that we use. And I really believe if anyone believes in human rights, then by logical extension of the philosophy of human rights, then they believe in animal rights, whether they like it or not. As long as they believe in human rights, by logical extension, they would believe in animal rights as well. So that's what the book is about.
Yeah. And we'll get on to talking about the fellowship and the actual work that you've been doing recently in just a second. But how do you think about the way that photographs and images work in addressing that logical fallacy? I mean, do you think they have a particular place to break through, or are they supporting an argument in particular ways? What's the function of images in relationship to that?
Yeah, I think it depends from the species that you're taking photos of. So for example, if you're taking like I've taken photos of cockfighting, and so that's a tradition, that's cultural. And someone can say, oh, well, that's cultural, you can't attack that. Well, you can't really appeal to culture because not everything cultural is moral necessarily. Some things are, some things aren't. And that's the whole beauty of culture, that as time passes, you change the culture and you adapt to the times, to the modern times. So that could be one thing. At the same time, you know, some people sometimes, I have one photo that I've never published actually, because I know that people will take it the wrong way. It was right after a slaughterhouse worker cut off the head of a cow and then took a break and lit a cigarette, and his friend said something and he turned around and smiled and laughed at his friend. But in that time, in that second, I took a photo and it looked like he's having fun by the fact that he's decapitated a cow, which was not the case. And people can use that to attack that specific person, which would be an ad hominem fallacy. So and so, like, I really have to be careful with what I'm putting out there, because I don't want to fuel people's hatred, let's say, or sometimes people use my images to justify racism, you know, like if I've taken a photo in Indonesia, they go like, oh, these Asians and I don't know what. And I'm like, I always feel like I have to put just a warning in advance, like, hey, this has nothing to do with that. The only reason I can do it here is because it happens where you live, but I can't take photos there. So keep the racism out of this. And it's really important. Like, it's difficult to show logical fallacies through images, but there are other things you can show. You can create a feeling of cognitive dissonance, for example, you know, or when someone looks at a photo and they say, oh, that reminds me of my dog, you know, and they think, oh, well, so what is the link here? And so that kind of thought can take place. It doesn't necessarily have to be a logical fallacy, but it can definitely create this one small like seed in the mind that makes them start questioning everything. They might even see a picture of a dog getting slaughtered or being taken for slaughter. And from the way they react to that, they can realize, oh, wait, why am I reacting so badly for a dog when I also do the same to other animals? And so that part is really interesting for me as well.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. We'll get in maybe some of those details. The question of race and so on is very interesting, particularly when it comes to dogs and animals that we, meaning Europeans, North Americans, take to be domesticated versus agricultural and so on. Lots of issues there. Let's talk a little bit about the fellowship. So you received the first Animal Photojournalism Fellowship from We Animals Media. What's the project that you undertook for that, and why did you choose to do that project?
What I decided at the time, and it really took some time for me to decide, like, okay, what would I really do, you know? And I think what I decided is, because there are so many opportunities and because I travel often, I thought, what if I keep it open and I take as many species, I basically cover as many species as I can during the time that I have, because then if we have like one big project covering many species, some species may annoy some people, and then if they continue with the others and they come across another species that they actually consume, then they can have that moment of connection. It's like, yeah, there's no moral difference between doing the same thing to this species or to that species. So I actually photographed chicken egg farms, basically. I photographed a lobster farm, a shrimp farm, a frog farm. A lot of people found that a bit like shocking, but actually I used to eat frogs as well when I was growing up in Lebanon. Chicken farm, like chicken that are raised for their flesh, so not egg farms. I actually went to several. I actually have the list here. Let me just double check, so I don't miss anything. All right, so yeah, chicken farm, chicken slaughterhouse, cockfighting as well, a fish farm, the frog farm, shrimp, lobster, and one of the most not disturbing, but I think a lot of people got shocked by the intensity was as a rabbit farm, and a species that is actually exploited in every single way, you know, for their flesh, for their fur, to test on, so makeup and yeah, everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, those were the little projects here and there that we worked on.
Yeah. So why don't you share some of the images that you're going to show us and talk us through? Are these images coming from the work that you did in the fellowship?
So I actually decided to share some from before working with We Animals and after, because you also see the different ways that I used to edit my photos. I used to use a specific way of editing that played with the colors and definitely made it a bit sadder, and like sadder than it already is. And one of the things that I learned that I hold like very valuable is that when it comes to photojournalism, you don't really make things sadder than you're supposed to document, not make it worse than it looks, which obviously is really good in this case, because then people cannot say, oh, this is edited to make it look worse than it is. Like it's worse enough. It's bad enough, let's say. Sorry, it's bad enough. So yes, I'll start. Let me just share my screen.
And just a reminder to people in the audience, if you want to pose a question, drop that into the Q&A box. I'll bring that into the conversation, or we'll certainly get to them at the end.
All right. I just also wanted to give a quick warning that there will be one photo where you'll see blood. There's no moment of slaughter that is taken in a photo, so there's no knife and blood anywhere, but there is definitely one photo that has a lot of blood. So if the rest are just in farms or after killing or before killing process in the slaughterhouse. But if anyone may find it distressing, maybe feel free to not look and just listen, or just take a break and join later. So actually this photo was taken around 4.5 or 5 years ago, so still early on. It used to be a dairy farm in Germany, and this was one of the first moments where I realized, up until this time, I used to use my camera mostly for videos. It wasn't until I walked into this place where I thought I should take pictures of this, because for a moment I felt this is what the future should look like. All dairy farms or animal farms should be empty like this, or hopefully transformed into a more useful place that is in line with the ethics and morality of humans. And it was really intense being in there, because I don't know, I've been to places where there has been war and conflict, and you feel this really intense presence, even though there's nothing, but that nothingness is so loud. Like, you look at this, and at least I can speak for myself. I can see the suffering that existed here. Maybe because I've seen the suffering personally, but I found it so interesting to capture this place empty, because I thought hopefully one day in the future it would look like this. And after this, I wanted to show some of the photos that I had taken at the vigils. So slaughterhouse vigils is when I went to slaughterhouse, and when the trucks arrived, we stopped them. Apologies for I used to put my copyright symbol and text on that. I didn't understand anything. I used to put it without understanding. And these are old photos, as you can see, quite edited. But I didn't want to change it. I wanted to show as it is, as I used to do it. This was outside a slaughterhouse in Poland, where around 30,000 pigs were brought in every single day between 3 and 5 months old. And this was one of my favorite angles to capture it, because you could always see the animal, and then them being imprisoned, and then the human free outside, so the outside world. And I took some photos there that were really, like, I would say, like the moments where I finished taking the photo and I thought, wow, these are like powerful photos. I should be doing this more often. And that's, let's say, I don't know if anyone can relate with this, but it's such a weird feeling to look at a photo and say this is a good photo when it's something so horrible.
Right.
You know, I feel like I'm not supposed to feel good about it, but what I'm feeling good about is the type of impact that it might have on the
Yeah,
person who
exactly.
is looking at it.
The word good covers does a lot of work in the sense of, if you think about it in terms of impact, effect, connection, and so
Yeah,
on.
exactly. Yeah.
Something that makes people stop and look is good
Yeah.
in a sense.
Yeah.
I mean, the first photo of the dairy farm is like the site of a war atrocity. You'll see photos coming out of Bosnia, look like this.
Yes.
But people were killed in this place. Let's see, in Ukraine, we'll see the same thing. We'll talk a little bit about, as we go along, about the kind of the parallel between conflict photography and the work that you're doing, because there do seem to be some
Definitely.
overlaps there. But just one
Yeah.
question: you say that in these early ones, particularly a couple before this, that they were edited, and by edited you mean processed. So the colors you were working
Yes.
on
So
color saturation and so on.
Lightroom, yeah, on
Yeah.
Lightroom, I added a lot of blue in the shadow and just like reduced the contrast, made it a bit
Right.
darker. You can definitely see in this one, there's it's a truck. It's supposed to be silver and white. There's a lot of blue in it.
Right.
But I don't know why. For me at the time, I thought like, oh, this is much sadder like this, so it will have a better impact.
Right.
And
yeah,
I think
this is something that you changed over time.
Yeah, I definitely don't do this anymore, except if I'm doing something just for myself.
Right.
Especially when it comes to photojournalism, as I learned, if I put this in its original colors, people can look at it and still get the message. But in these colors, yeah, some people are going to be even more impacted, but a lot of people are going to go like, this is so edited. It was probably not even that bad, they can say.
Yeah.
And I learned that it's much better to never even get to that place. We don't need to take the conversation there, where we can just leave it in the original colors as it happened.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's a few photos from those visuals. And so this is actually one of my, again, weird to say, favorite. You know what I mean. But one of my favorite photos. It was actually the first time I was documenting slaughter, and I actually spent around 15 to 20 minutes outside the slaughterhouse with this specific cow, and they had, I think when we arrived, 4 cows outside. So I documented the slaughter of all of them, and then they stopped and they said it's over, so we could leave. And then right before we leave, they said, actually, there's one more cow, and they brought in this one. And it was such a weird moment, because obviously, just because I spent some time with that cow, and a lot of cows are cuddly, they want to be touched and petted and things like that. Just because I spent some time with the cow doesn't mean that it's now more immoral to kill this cow. They still have the same value of life. But I really had a moment where I was like, I'm not sure if I can do this. But then I decided to stay, because I thought, well, how many times will I get this opportunity to film and take photos during this process, to share it online? And this is literally the moment where they're about to flip the machine so that the cow can no longer use their legs to try to move around, so it's easier to slit their throat, basically. And the reason why I find it so powerful was, first of all, because you can see the blood from the previous cows that were slaughtered here, but also the eye. If you just look at the eye, you'll realize the fear that this animal is going through. And it blows my mind that sometimes people even question whether or not these animals have feelings. Because if you step in a slaughterhouse, I've documented countless animals getting slaughtered, and I haven't seen a single one not try to escape getting killed. So in that way, this was one of the most powerful photos I think that I was able to take that night. And this was before that one, basically. The calf that you see on the side had some kind of sickness, so instead of treating, they had decided to kill the calf and then send for consumption as well. And yeah, you can see this is the most graphic photo that I mentioned earlier. The reason why I'm not a big fan of some of my photos is I don't like having the human face showing. I don't want anyone to take out their hatred or feeling of anger on the human, because I always want to remind people this person is doing their job because there's a demand for it. So if you don't like what he's doing, help finish and end the demand that there is for this. If they don't do it, someone else is going to do it.
Yeah. So the question is the industrial system, not the workers operating the system in this case.
Yeah, because the workers are there to fill a gap.
Yeah.
And the gap is, if tomorrow we tell everyone not to work in a slaughterhouse, people are still going to demand to eat animal products. And as long as there's demand, it's like the whole like drug trafficking. You take out one drug dealer, another drug dealer will take their place. I'm not comparing like which one is worse, by the way. I'm just like the idea. You should advocate for people not to consume like drugs that are going to destroy their community and their lives, not just take out the drug dealers. So yeah, that's why I was not very sure if I ever want to share this photo, but at the same time I thought it's just a moment that is so disturbing. I think that the calf is just sitting there in a pool of blood. The other cow is like the blood is coming out and slowly dying, and then the calf was killed next while on the floor, by the way, just there instead of putting them up because they were too small for the machine. This was a pig slaughterhouse that I went to. I won't be showing a photo of the slaughter, but it was hundreds of pigs that arrived that night for slaughter. And it was one of the places that I think one of the most intense or disturbing places I've ever been. Because first of all, and everything I'm going to mention, by the way, and I'm mentioning is industry standard. I never step out of my way to go film a specific way of slaughter that is worse than the industry standard, because I'm not interested in like dramatizing it more. So one of the standards for killing pigs is to first of all electrocute them by using like this kind of machine that they have on the side of their heads. Once they're electrocuted, they pass out. Then they hang them upside down and slit their throat, and then they pass them into this boiling water to make the skin softer. And then on the other side, they put them on like something that rolls and has like very sharp knives to take off the skin. So another method, a lot of people would be upset at this, like how could they do this? And like we will talk about it later, but they start talking about these Asians and I don't know what, they're so cruel. But if you look in Europe and in the States and in Canada or Australia even, they might not use the electrocuting way. What they use instead is gas chambers. So pigs are put in gas chambers in the civilized world. And so they're put in gas chambers, then they pass out, then they hang them upside down and slit their throat. So it continues in the same way. So nothing is worse or better. It's all equally immoral. So I just wanted to mention that quickly, since at least the slaughter photos that I'm going to be showing are mostly in Asia.
So we've got one question that I'll bring in now from Manuela, and that is, how do you manage to get access to slaughterhouses and animal farms? How do you negotiate to enter? And how
Yeah,
aware are they of what you're doing? I mean, they were aware that you're
sure. So
photographing, but are they aware of why
yeah,
you're photographing?
in Europe, I've been able to enter farms either with permission or without. With permission would be I just walk in with a big smile on my face and go like, yeah, I was just passing by here. Mind if I take some photos of the animals? And most of the time they're fine with it. I've had a few farmers say, oh, don't put this on the internet, otherwise like it's not good for us, it's not good for the business, it's not good for the industry. One of that was actually a Cadbury dairy farm, so the chocolate
Right.
chocolate factory. Yeah, the farmer immediately was like, no, you can't have this on the internet. And I was just there like, if you think you're doing nothing wrong, why don't you want me to upload like these images or videos online? But anyway, most of the time, but even that farm, by the way, they ended up letting me in, and we talked and I asked questions on what they do and how they do it. So in Europe, farms are relatively easy. Slaughterhouses, though, is where it gets really, really difficult. I've never been able to enter a slaughterhouse in Europe. They tend to use the whole hygiene and safety argument, but they don't even follow the hygiene rules. So they're supposed to wear specific clothing that they never wear. They walk in and out to it without ever changing their clothes or anything. Safety wise, after being in so many slaughterhouses, I know there's always a corner you can sit in and it will be safe. It's not like everywhere you walk there's going to be knives that you can slip and fall on. But it's very obvious that this industry doesn't want people to come into the slaughterhouses and document what's happening. In Asia, the way it works is much easier. I don't even lie. I literally walk up to them, whether it's a farm or a slaughterhouse, and I say, I'm doing some projects on animals who are killed for food. Can I come in? I've never had a single farmer or worker say no. So I think in that case, the question is, are they aware of what I'm doing? I wouldn't say that they're aware that I'm an animal rights activist and I'm gonna advocate against these habits, let's say. But at the same time, that's why I try my best to not show any faces, not show the place. I also prefer usually not mentioning the country. If someone messages me, oh, where was this? I say, it happens everywhere. This was in a specific country, but this happens everywhere. This method happens everywhere. It's completely irrelevant where these things are happening in the photo, because it's happening all around the world. Should we continue, or is there another question? Yes, okay. All right, so this was a pig farm. This is one of the photos that I had edited quite like harshly in blue because it made it much sadder. I remember very well. But it was a massive pig farm where the mothers were separated and put in small cages. They couldn't even turn around. Some of them had like either fallen or like rolled over their babies. A lot of piglets were dead. Some piglets were thrown outside the farm. And we spent a few hours there. And by the way, this was not in Asia, but I also will not mention the country it was in. I also want to say that I am not encouraging any illegal behavior. I'm just sharing photos and images. What people want to do with that is up to them. But it was a very disturbing place again, just because of the sheer number and space of the size of the space. You would just look, and for as far as your eyes could see, it's just like a cage and then a smaller area for the piglets and a cage and a smaller area, and then in between you had like countless piglets, of course, suffering with some disease and things like that. This was actually at an animal market. I'll be showing several photos of this market. This monkey was actually right above the cages that you see on the right side of the turkey. So in this one place they had the monkey, turkey, some ducks, so several species all crammed in one place. There was even an owl. This was in the store next door. It took me some time actually when I saw the owl. I was like, what is this? And then I realized it's actually an owl without the feathers. This was actually, I took these photos around the beginning of the pandemic, if I remember correctly. And they got a lot of like shares on social media because at the time people were really worried about animal markets and mixing wild animals and species in the same place, because that's how
the question
zoonotic
of whether
diseases start.
COVID came from a wet market and so on.
Exactly. And to be completely honest, I'll share this as well, because I know a lot of people tell me sometimes, oh, I could never do what you're doing, but I also could never do what some other photographers are doing. You know, I could have gone to what is known to be of Southeast Asia's most, I don't know if the crazy is the right term, but the most crazy market, they call it. It's, well, dogs, cats, monkeys, but all for human consumption. So they kill them all on the spot, and some animal photojournalists go to these spots. And I thought about it for a long time, but I came to the conclusion that at least for now, I don't think I can do it. This specific market that I'm showing the photos from only sold them there. They were not being sold in, well, after being cooked or anything. They were just there alive. So these are now the photos from the fellowship. This was at an egg farm, and it was battery cages, so very, very small area for each. In each like cage, there's at least 2 chickens, and that's where you start seeing, you know, a lot of their feathers are gone. They have issues, like health issues. Some of them are blind. They can barely move. This place had tens of thousands of chickens. The farmer was, I think, 50 or 60 meters from me. I asked permission in advance. And yeah, I was able to document there for I think around an hour and a half walking around. And the reason why I take the photos like this with chicken farms is because chickens are, in numbers, the species that is killed the most when it comes to land species. So obviously when we're talking about sea life, so fishes and other marine life, that's going to be in the trillions. We can't even comprehend the number. But when it comes to land animals, chickens are tens of billions of them are killed. And it's one of those animals where they're so commodified that even the word that we use for the food is the name of the animal. You know, you say I'm gonna eat chicken. You don't say I'm gonna eat a cow. You say I'm gonna eat meat.
Right.
And then with fish, it's the same.
Right.
Fish also. But what that does is that it completely erases the individual of the animal. And so when it comes to chicken farms, I try my best to come up close and really focus on a specific individual chicken, to remind people, like, yeah, when you have chicken wings, you know, if you had 2 chicken wings, that's one individual at least, that we're talking about.
And that does seem to be one of the common themes through the photos that you showed us so far, is actually very much close up, the animal face, the animal eyes. So that for you is a very deliberate strategy.
Yeah, the reason for that is because that's the easiest way to capture the, let's say, emotion, if there is one at the moment, of the animal. Another reason is because if it's a place where I entered without taking permission, I'd rather not show in wide angle the whole place of the location. But when it comes to places like this, at least this farm, I took permission. The farmer was there. I try to get as close as I can. Sometimes I do take wider photos where I either want to show the size or I want to show the numbers of the animals. And we'll see that when we get to the chicken slaughterhouse. I'll explain that, I feel like. Yes. So in this photo, obviously this is no longer like close up and like individual, but I wanted to show how systemic it has become. Like it's like, it's a production, you know, you look at it and and it's just numbers. You see the first line, but in the back there it's kind of blurred out because of the focal length. But it just goes around and around, and there's hundreds of birds passing by. But these hundreds of birds are hundreds of individual birds, you know, and people don't really think about chickens as fun animals, let's say, but they're actually very, very social animals. They don't like being alone. They like having company. You know, they communicate, and they're not as dumb as people want us to think. Not that being dumb gives anyone the right to kill someone else, because that would be a weird theory to have in society. But you know what I mean. So yeah, in this slaughterhouse, I tried my best to show that, you know, it's almost like I could have taken the photo on the far left and then just copy paste and just fix the perspective, and it would still look the same. That's what we're doing with these animals. We're just like consistently killing them one after the other without showing any like respect for their lives and their basic moral rights. And this was the part basically after they get killed. Here they are bleeding out. I'm not sure if you can hear the gecko. It's about to start.
Okay.
So they start bleeding out, and then they get taken to the other side. And once they pass to the other side, they are dipped in hot water, like boiling water again, to make the process of removing the feather easier later on. And this was the rabbit farm. Actually, the rabbit farm also had different species of chickens as well nearby. And this photo was, again, my favorite. I hate saying that, but it was just because there was the mother underneath them, and they just wanted to be as close to each other as possible. And that was the only space they could use, because the cage was so small that they had to climb up there and do it, because the mother was so big. She was taking the majority of space and could also barely stand up in there. So I wanted to finish off with happier photos. The rabbit farm was also from the fellowship, by the way. So, and same with the chicken slaughterhouse. This was at an animal sanctuary in Australia. This cow is blind, but she was saved from slaughter and lives a happy life out there. This was at an animal sanctuary in Germany, and the location and the buildings that are there, it was actually a factory farm, and now functions as an animal sanctuary. So a place where animals lived miserable lives is now a place where animals live happy lives and are protected and cared for. And this pig was, you can see actually the wall behind that, that's the factory farm. And now they can live there in peace. So yes, that's
great.
All I have to share right now.
Thanks. Let me, we've got a couple of comments, couple of questions, so I'll bring those in. One's a technical question, which I think is really, or a technical observation, which I think is very interesting, because.
Should I stop the screen, or?
No, you can leave one of the happy photos up.
All right, good.
That'll be good.
All right.
From Julie, an observation, she says, I find your early color choices, you know, where you were going with the blues and so on, interesting, given that many animals do not see the same colors as human animals. For instance, pigs are dichromats. They can discern variations of blue and green, but don't have the capability to distinguish all red shades of different wavelengths. So in a way, you are showing their world more accurately, inverted commas. So just an observation from her, that actually processing the way you did earlier.
I had not thought of that. That's very interesting.
Yeah, exactly. I know you answered this question earlier, but it's probably worth repeating from Sandy. They say, you mentioned that you ate meat as a child. What was your turning point? Was there one incident that changed your life? So perhaps just worth repeating.
Yes. Yes, it was, we had a cat at home that I really liked. Actually, if you want to get into details, my mom wanted to take off the the nails. I think the word is declawing
The claws,
of
yeah,
the cat.
declawing.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
So they don't scratch
because
you.
well, he was destroying the sofas and the couches, and I had a massive fight with my mom about it, saying like, this is their right, you can't just like do that to them, this is like someone cutting off your fingers. And she wouldn't accept that, and I ended up doing a Facebook group against my mom, and like invited all my friends into the group, and they used to write comments, and I used to read the comments out loud in the house. And one day she said, you know what, whatever, I won't do it. And so I claimed victory, and
Right.
the cat got to keep his nails. And then I was talking about it with a friend, and she said, you act like such an animal lover, but you just love your cat. You're not an animal lover. You still hunt animals, you kill them, you eat them. If you actually love animals, you would stop eating them. And she showed me slaughterhouse footage, and when I finished watching, I thought I either stop doing what I'm doing, or I find a really good argument to support what I just watched in the footage. And I never found an argument, neither by myself or nor from others who wanted to argue for killing animals so far.
Yeah. A question from Jinky. How do you approach encouraging people to look at images they don't necessarily want to see? And has this changed over time?
Yes, it's definitely changed. I used to force people to look at it, especially with family members and friends, because I always thought if you're going to pay for it, you have to look at it, which I still believe it. I still believe if you are paying for something, you have the moral obligation to look at what that thing is doing. And, I would apply that to myself. If I am about to buy a t-shirt in a specific company, and someone walks up to me and says, do you want to see the working conditions of the people who work at this company? And I go like, no, don't show me that. And then I still buy it. It's just a bit weird. At least we should hold ourselves more accountable. However, I no longer force it on people, just because I realized on the long term it doesn't really have a positive effect. People, if they're interested, will come back to it, but sooner or later. Right. And the reason for that is because there are so many people who are interested in the message that wasting your time trying to make someone who's not interested look at it is just a waste of time. You might as well stay with those who actually want to look at it and listen to it.
Yeah. So how do you use it? I mean, you're sharing these images with us in this event individually and telling the story and so on. By and large, how do you use these images? Do you use them as the basis for lectures and activism? Do you use them for articles and visually led stories? Tell us a little bit about that.
So basically, at the moment, I put them on the online platform of We Animals Media, because they have like organized it very well for anyone who wants to use images for animal advocacy to be able to go in there and find, let's say, the specific species or the country or the region, or the type of, let's say, like the farm or whatever. And from there, I know if I just upload it there, then anyone who's looking for it can make use of it. And that for me is a perfect situation, like the ideal way of dealing with it. I also sometimes share it on my social media, but with social media, that's the downside, that right now there's so much censoring that I'm afraid of posting these photos, because I'm afraid that I lose my platform that I've worked for right now, I don't know, like 6 years to build, just because of one photo. I'm afraid of losing all my work because of uploading that. So it's really unfair. But at the same time, I don't know, like, what's the perfect solution. So I just rather work with the Animals Media and have my pictures uploaded on the platform. And I know that anyone who can use it will use it and reach people with their work. And that's completely fine by me. And as I said, it's like the perfect way of reaching more people.
Yeah. So a question from Jiri, who says, great work, Seb. And was any of this work commissioned or shot on an organization's behalf?
From the ones that I showed, if I remember correctly, I didn't show any commissioned ones, if I'm not mistaken. For the fellowship ones, I received a fellowship amount that helped cover the transportation and project costs. But I'm pretty sure I didn't put any photos that were commissioned.
Right. And do you get commissions from organizations to produce
Yes.
images for them? Tell us a little bit about how that works and what sort of work that involves.
Yeah, I haven't done it too many times because even with the Animals Media, I haven't working. It's not like I've been doing this for 10 years, you know. But usually an organization reaches out to We Animals Media and says, we are based in this area and we are going to do a certain campaign. Do you have any photographer who can, or videographer who can help us out by doing this or that? And then We Animals has all the contacts and they reach out and they ask if you can do that. So that's how it works. And then you get in touch with the organization and you work on it.
Yeah. Question from Anne, going back to the fellowship. So the fellowship you just had with We Animals Media. Tell us a bit more about how long you had to work on, how long was the fellowship? How much work could you do? Was there a particular theme to it, or was it something that you proposed?
I think in the beginning I wanted to concentrate more on the chicken industry just because in Southeast Asia it's growing very, very fast. Also because of Western companies pushing chicken meat consumption, companies such as Cargill, they're trying to push it as much as they can on this area of the world. But eventually I realized, okay, I actually prefer covering as many species as I can. So I went that way. And we worked together for, if I'm not mistaken, 9 to 11 months, something like that. And I think that's 9 to 11 months. And then all the photos are now on the website of We Animals.
Yeah. And you'll be using those in lectures and so on. When you're lecturing, how do you integrate the visuals into kind of the moment?
Yeah, I forgot to answer that one earlier. So for the lectures, actually, I show footage, so video footage of as many industries as I can in 10 minutes. And they're not my videos. The reason for that is because based on where the lecture is, I get footage from farms and slaughterhouses of that country, because otherwise people in the crowd can go like, oh, that was sad, but that doesn't happen here. So I'd rather always use the footage that comes from that country. And those videos are usually filmed by undercover photojournalists. In the case of at least my work, and if I've ever used it, I had the opportunity to give a small talk at the annual gala event of the biggest animal welfare organization in Denmark, and I did that on behalf of We Animals. So I was very grateful for that opportunity. And in that case, yes, I did use some of my photos while talking about the importance of animal photojournalism.
Right. Judging by the images that you've shared with us, a lot of them are from animal markets or industrial-sized farms and so on. Is that the focus of your work? Question from Ted. He's asking whether that's the only thing that you want to include, or do you include hunting in the wild as well?
I haven't so far been able to document hunting in the wild, to be honest. I haven't even thought about it. Could be because that's a very small percentage of the population who does that. And hunters already have such a bad name. Even non-vegans hate hunters, which is very interesting. It's very interesting because the only difference between a non-vegan, so a person who consumes animal products who doesn't hunt, and a person who consumes animal products and hunts, the only difference is that the hunter is at least logically consistent with their stance. So, and this is something that I even tell other animal rights activists. I tell them, yeah, I know we feel bad, we're not happy, and we oppose hunting, but at least hunters are in line with what they believe in. You know, sometimes we'll say, I could never kill an animal. but then they're eating animal products all day long. Like you're still killing an animal. You're just because you didn't hold the knife doesn't mean there's no blood on your hands, basically. So, however, I would not be against documenting hunting. I just don't know if it's the best use of my time. Like I wouldn't come out of my way, except if, let's say, hypothetically speaking, if a specific animal who is endangered, let's say, or I don't know, if an extremely horrible way that tortures an animal in the process is being used, then of course I would do it. And if something happens on the spot, I would do it as well. And just to clarify, I don't necessarily target factory farms. I've also documented backyard slaughter. I've literally documented one chicken being slaughtered once. And so that's not a factor. It wasn't even a farm. It was outside a house. So for me, and for when it comes to the philosophy of animal rights, it's not about how many are being killed, how badly they're being treated before they get killed or during the process. It's really about not seeing other animals as resources or commodities.
A question from Nigel. Is there a strategy that you would recommend for approaching a slaughterhouse or farm to capture footage while trying to obtain image or footage when you're working by yourself?
I think what has worked the most for me, at least in Europe, where I know that they are aware of veganism and animal rights, and they know that how footage can be used, I would say just walk in as someone who's happy who came across a farm. I actually did that in Australia. There was a big animal market, sheep. I think they were bringing like thousands of sheep and cows. And the second we arrived, it was in the middle of the day, this man started approaching us in a very aggressive way. And I immediately walked up to him and I said, hey, like, how's it going? I'm traveling in Australia for the first time. I've never seen something like this. Can I take some photos? And immediately his mood changed, because initially he was like, oh, these vegan activists, here to disrupt my business or whatever. The climate at the time, at least in Australia, was quite intense when it came to animal rights activism and farmers. So just body language and communication plays a big part. And if you're mean to the person or you disrespect them, then they're not going to let you in anyway. So why do that when you can just like put a smile on your face, act like you're just happy you came across and you're interested to document and do your work and go away. And yeah, it has worked for me. I would say maybe one time in Germany, I asked a farmer and they were like, no, I don't want. And I said, fine. And I walked away because I know I can do it with other farmers and it wouldn't be any problem.
So we're coming towards the end of our time. So that's just a reminder for anyone in the audience who wants to drop in a final question or so. I've got a couple here. One from Sarah. Are there projects or ideas you want to explore in the future? Have you got some particular things that you're thinking about doing?
There are, but they're very difficult ones. One of them is animal testing, but unfortunately it's one of the most ridiculously protected industry that you could imagine. Like the amount of security measures they take. Like I've seen animal testing facilities that have 5 to 6 meter walls, cameras everywhere, barbed wire for I don't know how many meters, like several ones, and then it's really impossible to find a way to get in. But it's unfortunately an industry that tortures and kills countless animals. Another one is, I don't want to mispronounce the name, so I want to, yes, it's a horseshoe crab farming. Have you heard of it? It's really disturbing.
I know what horseshoe crabs are, but I've never seen a horseshoe crab farm.
Yeah, so they basically use their blood for the medical industry, and they make so much money out of it. It's one of the most expensive products that you can make out of animals, if I'm not mistaken. Don't take my word for it, but it's really expensive. So it's a very big industry, and because it's tied to the medical industry, of course, it's very much protected as well.
Yeah.
But it's awful, because up until I heard about it from another animal rights activist, I didn't even know about the animal. I didn't know that animal, that species existed. And lastly, the last one that I would like, that is relatively new, is the octopus farm in Spain. They started farming octopuses now. So I would like to be able to document that one day, and we'll see if that happens.
Yeah. A question from Nella. She says, thank you. The farm and slaughterhouse photographs are really impactful and haunting. But a technical question, what kind of equipment do you find most helpful for this kind of photography? Is there a particular or favorite camera that assists in the work?
Yeah, I've been using a Sony a7 III since I started. I find it perfect camera for the work that I do. Even if someone gave me an unlimited budget now, I wouldn't upgrade. I wouldn't see the need of upgrading. It's really a very good camera. Lens wise, I either use a 20 millimeter 1.8 Sony lens, or 24 to 105 f4, which is also a Sony lens. These two together are, in my opinion, the perfect combination. The only downside is that the 24 105 f4 in the dark, if it's dark inside, it's not a perfect situation, because then you have to pump the ISO up and then you get more grainy photos. In that case, yeah, you could go for, I think Tamron had a 24 to 75, if I'm not mistaken. I may be wrong about the numbers, but it's 2.8, which is better, of course, but then you don't get the same zooming in advantage that the 105 gives. But in general, the 20 millimeter 1.8 is more than enough for me.
Great. And do you work alone or part of a larger team on a shoot? That's a question from
I think the most I've done is just one extra person with me also taking videos or photos.
Yeah. And does that make it easier to be a smaller group, to be one or two?
I usually prefer not to be more than one person holding a camera, because I think that might look kind of like intimidating. If you're a farmer and then two people walk up to your farm with cameras in their hands, it's not as friendly as one person showing up with a camera and going like, hey, can I come in and take some photos? So I definitely prefer working alone. I also prefer working alone because after having documented with another person, I also realize sometimes you want to make sure that the other person is also able to take photos, but also you're not in the way, you're not in the forgot the word, in the picture, basically in the frame. And I'd rather not have to worry about those things.
Yeah.
But if Joe is still listening, I still wanna really want to be able to work with Joe. So that doesn't apply to her.
Question from Sandy, which is an interesting one. Is there an organization or resource that you can recommend that highlights alternatives to animal use, such as proven alternatives to animal testing, plant-based foods, synthetic fur, etc.? And interestingly, is there a photographer that's doing work on that area, like documenting the alternatives as well as the question of industrial animal farming?
At least right now, I cannot think. Apologies if there is, and I cannot remember. But right now, I cannot think. When it comes to alternatives for animal testing, yes, there are many alternatives. To begin with, even if there weren't any, the whole issue of testing, it should be talked about. First of all, because a lot of people in the medical industry, a lot of doctors are coming out and talking against it, simply because you can't test what a substance would do to a human by checking what it would do to another species, when other species are simply other species. And then second of all, it's very interesting because when you ask a scientist who is pro animal testing, how can you justify testing on other animals? they say, well, because they're not like us, so we don't really have to use the same moral values with them. But then if you say, how do you scientifically justify
Yes.
animal testing, they say, oh, they're just like us. So it's like, you have to make up your mind. Are they like us or are they not? But there are
another logical fallacy.
Exactly. Thankfully, there are methods. Some of them include, for example, simply growing the, let's say, organs or skin out of human cells and then testing on that. There are also a lot of methods where they can test the medicine with smaller doses on humans, and at least on obviously consenting humans. And at least in that way, you can actually have the right results. Because at the moment, there's not only a lot of deaths, but a lot of people, being tricked into, I'm not saying intentionally, but into taking a medicine that the scientific community thought worked on a rat, so therefore it should work on a human. So yeah, but yes, there exists several alternatives. The problem is that there is so much money in animal testing that not enough investment is being put into finding an alternative. So if governments and the scientific community cared enough, they could pour that money into the technology of more efficient and moral testing, and that would have better results for the animals and better scientific and medical results for the humans.
I just shared a link that Victoria provided to a Canadian Centre for Alternatives to Animal Methods that people can follow up. To wrap up, we've got 3 questions that I think are really important, and I'll kind of combine them because they're addressing the same sort of thing for you, Seb. And that's the question about how you manage your emotions in photographing these situations, and how you manage your mental health in the moment. And specifically, Ted asked, does the work that you do actually haunt you? He said, do you sleep okay? He was referencing the fact that he used to photograph some animal testing, and that raised some issues and so on. So how it's an important thing, and this is one of the parallels, I think, to conflict photography and war photography, is the potential for PTSD actually arising out of certain situations. So how do you approach that question of managing your emotions when you're documenting, and then managing your mental health during and after the process of documenting?
During documenting, I can honestly say I completely shut down all emotions, and thankfully it's not something that I had to practice. Let's say it just came naturally from the first time. I'm basically like a robot. I have no emotions. In my head, it's like, I'm here to do my job and leave. That's it. Obviously, I've had moments where things have just been like, there was one specific moment. I won't name the species, but it was in a slaughterhouse, and after slitting the throat of the animal was not dead yet, and the worker wasn't paying attention and even stepped on the throat of the animal, and the eyes were like opening like really wide. And obviously when something like that very specific happens, it hits me hard. But usually the process of killing animals is so like automatic for the workers, like they do it one after the other, that like specific things like this don't happen often. So I'm just there concentrating on the footage, making sure everything is in focus, making sure the ISO is well, the zoom range is well, there's no faces showing in the frame. And when I'm doing all of that, I don't really have time of thinking, oh, this is so bad, it just doesn't pass my mind. When it does pass, it's actually when I'm editing, because that's when I remember the moments and I remember the individuals. So when I'm editing, sometimes like I click to the next photo, and then the second the photo comes, I remember that specific animal. And obviously then it's difficult. The way I deal with mental health personally is I have a relatively strict I don't know how to call it, but basically habits that I have for myself. So I run, I cycle, I work out, and one of the things that has helped me the most with mental health is I do ice baths. So I actually have a chest freezer in my house that I bought, and I've converted it into an ice bath. So it's like automatic. And whenever life is getting too hard, I sit in the ice
Okay.
bath. It's very weird because I didn't know that cold plunges can have such a positive result on your mental health, but I started it as just testing if I can do it, and then immediately I realized a massive change in my sleep quality, my energy, and my anxiety. My anxiety, I would say, easily 90 to 95% gone after starting practicing ice baths, just because the only way you can sit inside is by concentrating on your breath. And if you concentrate on your breath, everything changes in your body, but most importantly, you can't really think about bad things because you're with your breath, you're in the moment. And that basically teaches your mind to refer to your breath in moments of anxiety. So when you're supposed to hit fight or flight mode, which is what's supposed to happen when you enter cold water, your mind switches to your breathing and you start controlling your breathing unconsciously. And that helps a lot. And the reason why I get into these details is because I literally want everyone to go and start doing it, just because it's at least for me, I can say it did wonders. So with mental health, for me, it's exercise and a good routine of ice bath and breath work. I think, was there anything else in the question? Does it haunt me? Again, I've had moments that have been difficult. I've had a long time, at least a year and a half, where any child crying or a loud scream would remind me of pigs screaming from gas chambers or in the trucks, because they very much scream like humans when they're afraid or getting hurt. It's a very, very loud scream. And I've had nights where I've just heard it for no reason. And the most annoying one is when basic life things, as I said, like you're in a public space and a kid cries. For me, it immediately hits that part of my memory. But that has stopped, at least. Like, it's been a while since I've had one of those moments.
And the final question from me: are you seeing progress through the activism? And I don't mean, that you're individually responsible for changing everyone's views on animal rights, but are you seeing changes in European, North American society in relationship to animal rights? And do you think that activism is leading to that progress? How would you characterize the situation?
Yes, changes, definitely. Yes, there's a lot of change, but I always am skeptical about the reason of change. I would contribute, but I've seen a lot of research that shows that one of the main reasons for people not consuming animal products is either climate change or health. It's not very often that it's animal rights, unfortunately. Now, I'm not going to say, no, then don't do it. I'm happy that people are switching, but I wish they switch for the ethical side, because I also think, and this is also in when it comes to academic research, they talk about how removing speciesism, the idea of discriminating against someone, treating them differently, morally speaking, based on their species, removing speciesism from society may help us also remove other types of discrimination, because speciesism tends to be one of the first type of discrimination that we are taught. So this animal looks different to me, therefore I can do harm to them or exploit them, can later on in life turn into, this human is not the same gender as me, is not the same sex or religion or race or skin color, whatever, and that can lead to exploitation or discrimination. And so I just think that if more and more people were active and talking about this issue, not only would we help more animals and stop this war that we have waged against animals, where we kill 84,000 animals per second, but also we could understand that if even the most differently looking species on the earth deserves basic moral rights,
Mhm.
then of course we're not going to continue discriminating against each other as well.
Perfect place to end. Seb, I want to thank you for your time and presentation and discussion. I think we've really
Thank you.
gone into a lot of really significant issues, a lot of challenging issues, that a lot of us need to think about. So we really appreciate that. And
Thank you.
we're hoping to follow up with an article from you and an article from Joanne, if she's still listening, for the 7 Insider blog on these questions, because I think it's a very significant area to think about the role of visuals, advocacy, activism, and impact. So we appreciate that very much. And also thanks to everyone in the audience. We really appreciate you coming too. And we will see you in about 10 days for the next event. But Seb, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thanks to everyone who joined as well.
Great. We'll let you get to bed
Bye-bye.
in Indonesia now. Thanks, Seb.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.